Instructor said no weapon can stop it. She loaded a round despite the risks. The hum started in my back teeth before Instructor Veilcore even opened his mouth. Not the kind of hum you hear, the kind you feel, like a dental nerve that had decided to form opinions and share them. I pressed my tongue against my molars and told myself it would stop. It did not stop. It just moved lower, settled somewhere between my jaw and my collarbone, and stayed there like a bad decision I had not made yet. I was the only human in the room. Again. 26 recruits from 6 species, seated in a semicircle around a display platform that floated 2 feet off the ground and projected light in colors I did not have names for. The Ethan beside me, crystalline, 7 feet tall, quietly radiating the kind of calm that comes from not having a nervous system the way I understood nervous systems, did not look at me. The Dreth behind me smelled like copper wire and cold rain. The Sorathi across the room had already produced a data tablet and were running numbers on something that was not the lesson yet. Because of course they were. I had a notebook, paper with a pen. The Dreth behind me made a sound that I was fairly sure translated to amusement. I clicked my pen and wrote the date. Veilcore moved to the center of the platform. I had seen his file. 640 years old. Former combat command across 3 galactic engagements, decorated in 4 different systems under 4 different flags. The kind of record that makes you feel like your own existence is a rough draft. He was 8 feet of crystalline structure that caught the light wrong, like a prism that had decided to be a person instead, and when he turned toward the room the hum in my teeth sharpened to a point. "Today," he said, and his voice was resonance layered on resonance, each word arriving at slightly different frequencies so you heard it in your ears and your chest and the base of your skull all at once. "We discussed the Keth." The room changed. Not visibly, not with any movement or sound, but something shifted in the air the way pressure shifts before a storm rolls in over the ridge back home. The Ethan beside me straightened a fraction. The Sorathi stopped their calculations. The Dreth behind me went completely, absolutely silent. The display platform bloomed into an image. The Keth did not look like much at first, roughly humanoid in the way that a collapsed building is roughly a house. 4 limbs arranged with purpose, a central mass, a structure that implied a head, but the surface of it moved, not breathing, not muscle. The surface of it moved the way static moves across an old screen, constant, low, restless, like something underneath was always in the process of becoming. Veilcore let us look. Then he said, "It does not die." He paused, let that land. Every civilization in this room has engaged the Keth in direct combat at some point in its history. Every civilization has filed engagement reports. Every civilization has attempted termination through conventional and unconventional means. Energy discharge, kinetic impact, plasma-grade thermal application, resonance weaponry, chemical agents. 17 distinct approaches documented over 300 years. The display shifted, a list, long enough that it scrolled. "Every attempt," Veilcore said, "has failed." He turned his focus across the room with the slow patience of something that had watched civilizations rise and spend themselves against immovable problems. The Keth does not die because it does not stay dead. A Keth soldier sustains fatal damage and ceases function. Within 90 seconds it reconstructs. The cellular structure rethreads itself using ambient quantum coherence, the same field that underlies all stable matter in this region of space. The damage is reversed. The soldier stands. It continues. The Ethan beside me made a low sound in its throat. The Sorathi had not returned to their calculations. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know about how serious this was. I wrote in my notebook, rethreads using ambient field, 90 seconds, every weapon failed. Then below that I wrote, every weapon so far. I underlined it once, then again, then I looked up. Your task, Veilcore continued, is not to defeat the Keth. That framing is a cognitive error that has cost lives across every species in this room. Your task is to understand what the Keth is, what it does, and how to manage an engagement in which termination is not a viable outcome. Survival protocols, containment, strategic withdrawal, these are your tools. He looked around the room. You do not fight the Keth, you survive them or you do not. The room accepted this. I could feel it, the collective exhale of species who had made their peace with the shape of the problem, who had learned to hold an unwinnable thing and carry it without dropping it. 600 years of tactical doctrine said, this cannot be solved. 600 years of dead said, we know. I tapped my pen against the page. The image on the display rotated slowly. The Keth's surface kept moving, that low, restless static, rethreading, always in the process of becoming. 90 seconds. Every weapon. I drew a small circle around the words, every weapon so far, and stared at it until the class ended. Everyone filed out with the particular quiet of people who had just been reminded that some problems do not resolve. I stayed in my seat. The Ethan beside me paused, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds with eyes that were not eyes so much as structured light, and then left without a word. The Dreth behind me did not look back. Veilcore was reorganizing the display when I walked up to the platform. He did not stop what he was doing. He did not acknowledge me for a long moment. Then the hum in my teeth shifted, not louder, but more focused, like he had turned something toward me that was not quite attention and not quite warning. Recruit Calloway, he said. Yes, sir. The debrief materials are available through the standard archive access. If you have questions about the survival protocols. I have one question, I said. It is not about the survival protocols. He stopped reorganizing the display, turned toward me with the slow, full attention of something very old and very tired. In 300 years, I said, has anyone found a weapon that did not interact with the ambient quantum coherence field? The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture, the kind that presses back when you lean into it. Veilcore looked at me for a long moment, not the way a teacher looks at a curious student, the way my grandmother used to look at incoming weather rolling over the mountain, not afraid of it, just already tired of what it was going to do. That, he said finally, is not a question that has been productively pursued. That is not a no, I said. He was quiet for another beat, then he turned back to the display. Review the archive materials, recruit, he said. Standard access. The course materials will answer your questions. I walked out. He was not wrong that the materials would answer questions. He was just wrong about which questions. That dog absolutely would hunt. I went to find the archive. The archive access terminal smelled like ozone, and something I could not identify. Something the Dreth archivist had been eating, probably. Something that had no business being food by any standard I had grown up with. He sat behind a desk that was 3 times too large for him, and looked at me over the top of a data display with the particular expression of someone whose entire professional purpose was the organized prevention of other people finding things. Species designation, he said. Human. Clearance level. Recruit Academy standard access. He made a sound. It was not an encouraging sound. Academy standard access retrieves course materials, historical summary documents, and approved research archives up to classification level 3. He folded what passed for his hands. Most of what you are about to ask for is not classification level 3. I have not asked for anything yet, I said. He looked at me, the way people look at a closed door when they can already hear something on the other side of it. No, he said, but you will. His name was Oren. I figured that out from the tag on his desk, which was in 4 languages, and one of them was standard. He had been the archive keeper at the academy for what the plate beside his name indicated was 42 years, which meant he had watched a lot of recruits come in and ask for things they should not ask for, and he had, in 42 years, developed a very specific face for it. He was making that face at me right now. Keth engagement files, I said. All of them, every species. Every documented engagement, 300 years. Oren closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. The summary documents are available at level 3. Full engagement files are restricted. How restricted? Level 7. How does a recruit get level 7 access? They do not, he said. Level 7 access is granted to active command personnel and senior research faculty with specific project authorization. He looked at me steadily. Not recruits, not humans, not people who have been at this institution for 6 days. I looked back at him just as steadily. The summary documents, can I get those? Yes. Then I will start there. He pulled up the request form with the energy of a man surrendering a small war. I signed in, settled at the nearest terminal, and started reading. The summary documents were thorough in the way that documents written by committees are thorough, everything covered, nothing revealed. They told me what Veil Corps had told me with more footnotes. The Keth rethreads, the field coherence mechanism, the 90-second window, 17 approaches, all failed, survival protocols, containment, withdrawal. But summary documents are written from something. Every summary has a source. I pulled the citation index, started tracing references. The summary document cited a compiled research review from 220 years ago. The research review cited primary engagement reports. The primary engagement reports had file numbers. File numbers are classification neutral. They are just numbers. I wrote down 47 file numbers. Took them to Oren. These are the source documents for the approved summary materials, I said. The summary materials are available at level 3. The sources for those materials should carry the same classification. Oren stared at my list for a long time. That, he said slowly, is technically a coherent argument. I know. It is also the kind of technically coherent argument that causes me significant administrative problems. I know that too, I said. He looked at me, looked at the list, looked back at me. Then he pulled up his access terminal with the energy of a man who was going to be writing a report about this later and already resented it. 31 of these I can release under your logic, he said. The other 16 are restricted on independent grounds. 31 is good, I said. 31 is a start. It took 4 hours. 31 engagement reports spanning 300 years, 12 species, and more dead than I wanted to add up. I read them all, every single one. The Ethan engagements from the early contact period, brutal, documented in the precise, affectless language of a species that processes grief through mathematics. The Dreth frontier engagements from the expansion years, shorter reports, harder reading, the kind of file that is brief because the people who would have written more did not survive long enough to write it. The Sorathi analytical breakdowns, the longest, the most thorough, the most deeply committed to the idea that a problem which had not been solved yet was a problem that had not been approached correctly yet. Every single approach, every single failure, every single note about how the energy discharge or the kinetic impact or the plasma application interacted with the ambient coherence field and fed the rethreading process. I ate a protein bar at some point, did not remember eating it, found the wrapper in my hand. And then I found report 7 alpha gamma 12. It was at the bottom of the 31st file, short, barely 2 pages, filed 193 years ago by a sector authority records officer who had the energy of someone processing a very large backlog and not looking too hard at any individual item. The vessel was a civilian mining ship. Registry number, crew manifest, route documentation, all standard. The incident report was brief. The Keth had boarded the vessel during a routine extraction run near the outer belt. The crew had no military-grade weapons on board. The report noted this 3 times, in 3 different places, with the particular emphasis of someone making sure their liability documentation was solid. What they did have was a sidearm. 1. A relic piece, a chemical propellant firearm, pre-alliance manufacture, caliber 11.43 millimeters, lead core ammunition. The kind of weapon that belongs in a history archive behind glass, not in an active mining operation. 1 crew member had fired it. 1 round. The Keth soldier hit by that round did not rethread. I stopped breathing for a moment. Read it again. The Keth soldier hit by that round did not rethread. It sustained damage and did not reconstruct. It remained non-functional. The crew was listed as lost with all hands 6 minutes later. The Keth had not come alone. 1 round, 1 result, 6 minutes and then nothing. The report had been filed, numbered, and placed in an archive where it had spent 193 years, not being read by anyone who was looking for what I was looking for, because nobody was looking. The crew was dead. The weapon was a museum piece. The result was a data point attached to a tragedy, and data points attached to tragedies get filed and left alone because following up on them means looking at the tragedy again, and nobody wants to do that. I sat with it for a long time. 1 round, chemical propellant, lead core, no energy signature, no field interaction, subcoherence threshold. No field interaction. The other 17 approaches had all failed because they all operated at energy levels that intersected with the coherence field. They all fed the process they were trying to stop. But a lead core round fired from a chemical propellant mechanism, slow by galactic weapons standards, primitive by any measure, carrying no field signature at all, passed under the threshold. Did not feed the field. Did not trigger the rethreading. The Keth was still dead. I looked at the 3 rounds left in the case. Lord have mercy. I wrote down everything, every technical specification in the report, every caliber notation, every propellant type, every detail the records officer had included in their liability documentation, without understanding what they were documenting. I cross-referenced it against the coherence field theory in the summary documents, and the numbers aligned in the specific, quiet way that things align when they are true. Then I closed the terminal and took my notes to the historical firearms vault. The request got flagged inside 40 minutes. My comm unit buzzed with a single line from the administrative system. Report to Instructor Vale Corps, Room 7, immediately. I looked at my notes, looked at the comm, picked up my notes and went to Room 7. Oren at the front desk as I passed did not look up, but he said very quietly without expression, "I did write that report." "I know," I said. "Good luck, recruit." "I appreciate that, Oren." I walked to Room 7 with the notes in my hand and the hum starting again in my back teeth, pressing into my jaw, and I thought about a mining crew that had found the answer 193 years ago and died 6 minutes later, and how their answer had been sitting in a file ever since, waiting for someone stubborn enough to go find it. That was enough to keep walking. Room 7 was not a classroom. It was a small consultation space, the kind of room that exists specifically for conversations that are not supposed to be comfortable. A single table, 2 seats, no display platform, no windows. The light came from panels in the ceiling that produced a clean, neutral brightness that made everything look like it was being evaluated. Vale Corps was already there. He stood rather than sat, which I understood. He was 8 feet tall and built like something that had never needed furniture to feel authoritative. He had a data display open on the table, my archive access log, my request for the firearms vault, the flag from the administrative system. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. The hum in my teeth arrived sharp and immediate. "Sit," he said. I sat. He remained standing for a long moment. Then he moved around the table in that slow, deliberate way of his, each step carrying the weight of 600 years that had watched this exact shape of conversation play out in some form across multiple species and multiple centuries. He stood at the end of the table and looked at me with those light-structured eyes that were not eyes in any way I fully understood. "You accessed 31 restricted source files," he said. "Technically unrestricted source files," I said. "They were the citation sources for approved Level 3 materials." Oren agreed the logic was sound. "Oren is going to have a complicated week," Veilcore said. "That is not your concern right now." "Yes, sir." "You submitted a request for access to the historical firearms vault." "Yes, sir." "You are a first-week recruit with standard Level 3 clearance and no active research authorization." "Yes, sir." He looked at the data display, then at me. There was something in the quality of his attention that I could not read, not anger, not amusement, not the patient exhaustion I had expected. Something older than any of those. "Show me what you found," he said. I put the notes on the table. He looked at them without touching them for a long moment. Then he picked them up. His hands, if you called them hands, moved across the pages with the careful thoroughness of someone who had spent 6 centuries reading things that mattered. He read every line, turned the page, read the next. The room was very quiet. The hum in my teeth faded to almost nothing. When he set the notes down, he did not speak immediately. He moved back to the other side of the table and stood there with his hands behind his back and looked at something I could not see. "Report 7 Alpha Gamma 12, he said. "I know this file." I had not expected that. "You know it," I said. "It was reviewed in the General Archive audit of 80 years ago. The research committee at the time classified it as an anomaly, undocumented conditions, no controlled variables, a single incident attached to a vessel with no surviving witnesses and no follow-up capability." He paused. "The conclusion was that the result was coincidental, a recording error or a Keth soldier that had already sustained prior damage before the engagement and was operating below threshold." "That is possible," I said. "It is also possible that a chemical propellant round with a lead core and no energy signature operates below the coherence field threshold and does not trigger the rethreading process, and that the committee wrote it off because the weapon was a museum piece from a dead crew and nobody wanted to spend resources chasing a dead end." Veilcore looked at me. "You have built a theoretical framework from one anomalous data point," he said. "I have built a theoretical framework that is consistent with the coherence field mechanics documented in the research review, supported by the energy interaction patterns in all 17 failed approaches, and backed by one direct observational result." I kept my voice level. "The 17 failed approaches are also just data points. We called those a pattern. I am asking why this one is an anomaly and those 17 are a doctrine." The room was quiet again. He picked up the notes a second time. "Read them again, slower." I watched him cross-reference something in his memory. I could see it in the way his focus moved, internal and precise, the way very old minds move through very large stores of information. "The coherence interaction energy threshold," he said, not to me, to himself, or to the 600 years of things he knew. "A sub-threshold projectile with no field signature. Would not feed the process," I said. "Would not trigger reconstruction. Lead core absorbs rather than deflects. Chemical propellant produces no electromagnetic bloom. The round passes through without giving the field anything to use." He set the notes down, looked at me directly. "And you want access to the firearms vault," he said, "to retrieve a period-accurate weapon and test this." "Yes, sir." "Based on one anomalous report from a civilian vessel." "And the theoretical framework, sir?" The silence stretched. He looked at me with that look, the one I had already named, the one my grandmother used for incoming weather, the particular stillness of something old enough to recognize a shape before it fully forms and tired enough to know that recognition does not stop it. "What you are proposing," he said slowly, "is that for 193 years, the answer to the most persistent tactical problem in galactic military history has been sitting in an archive attached to a report that nobody followed up on because the crew was dead, and the weapon was primitive, and the incident looked like an anomaly." I said nothing. The answer was yes, and we both knew it. "And you are asking me to authorize a test," he continued, "for which there is no precedent, no approved protocol, no controlled research framework, and which, if it fails, will consume academy resources and credibility on the basis of a theory developed by a first-week recruit from a single archived incident." "And if it works," I said, "it changes everything." Veilcourt was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, not softer, not warmer, but different, like he had moved something aside to make room for what he was going to say. "I am not going to give you official authorization," he said. I started to speak. "I am going to give you access," he said, "to testing Bay 12, unofficial, off the research schedule. You have 3 days. If you destroy equipment, if you create a safety incident, if this goes wrong in any way that touches the Academy's operational status, you were never there and I have no knowledge of what you were doing." He picked up the notes and handed them back to me. "If you are right." He stopped. I waited. "If you are right," he said again, and something in his voice was very still, "bring me your documentation, every step, every result, clean data." I stood up, took the notes, moved toward the door. "Recruit Calloway." I stopped. He spoke in his own language first, a long, low resonance that I felt more than heard, something that passed through the room like a hand along a wall in the dark. Then the translation followed, quieter. "Humans carry damage the way other species carry bone," he said. "Load-bearing." It was not a compliment. I knew that. I could hear what it actually was, something between an observation and a warning, the words of someone who had watched what load-bearing damage eventually does to a structure, how it holds and holds and holds, and then one day does not. I filed it under useful anyway. "Thank you, sir," I said. I walked out of room 7 with 3 days and a theory, and the memory of a crew that had found the answer, and not lived long enough to tell anyone what it was. I intended to tell everyone. Down the corridor my footsteps were steady. The hum in my teeth was gone. Something else had taken its place, quieter than the hum, slower, the kind of feeling that does not have a name because it does not need one. The kind of feeling that is just forward, move forward. Testing Bay 12. 3 days. I went to find the vault. The firearms vault was in sub-level 4, behind a door that required 3 separate clearance confirmations, a physical key that Veilcourt had placed in my hand without a word during a brief stop at his office, and the patience to wait while the environmental seal cycled through a process clearly designed for people with lifespans measured in centuries. I had the patience. The door opened. The air inside was different, dry, controlled, the specific still quality of spaces that hold things that are not meant to age. The room was long and low-lit, lined on both sides with sealed cases, each one labeled in multiple languages with catalog numbers and preservation dates. Some of the cases held weapons I recognized from historical records. Some held weapons I did not recognize at all, and was not entirely sure belonged to any species I had studied. The catalog system directed me to case 7C. Inside it, behind preservation glass, was the firearm. It was smaller than I expected. Not small, proportioned correctly for a human hand, but somehow smaller than the weight it had been carrying in my mind for the past 4 hours. A semi-automatic frame, pre-Alliance manufacture, the finish worn along the grip from years of handling. The catalog listed it as a standard civilian market sidearm from approximately 200 years ago. Not military, not designed for anything extraordinary. Designed, in fact, for exactly the kind of ordinary danger that comes with working far from help in places that are not safe. The ammunition was catalogued separately. Lead core rounds, same manufacture period, 14 remaining in a sealed preservation case. The propellant was still active. The catalog noted this with mild archival surprise, as if the rounds had made a point of remaining viable well past any reasonable expectation. I signed the access form, removed the weapon and the ammunition with the care of someone handling something that was either going to be a footnote or a turning point, and was not yet sure which. Then I went to testing Bay 12, and I started building. The test setup took most of the first day. I needed a controlled environment that would measure quantum coherence field activity in real time, which meant borrowing equipment from the general research pool under a project description, vague enough to be technically accurate and not specific enough to trigger additional flags. I needed a Keth biological sample, which meant submitting a materials request to the xenobiology lab under the academic study authorization that all academy recruits carried as standard, because the xenobiology lab maintained samples for coursework purposes and nobody had thought to restrict access to that particular resource for this particular purpose. Nobody had thought to restrict it because nobody had done what I was doing before. That thought sat with me while I calibrated the coherence field monitors. By the second day, I had the setup. Coherence field monitors at 3 points around the test chamber. Keth biological sample, not a full tissue mass, but enough to carry the same quantum-threaded cellular structure, enough to show rethreading activity if rethreading occurred. A clean firing line. A data capture system that would record every variable from the moment of discharge through the full 90-second rethreading window. By the third day, I had an audience. I did not invite them. They came on their own, the way information moves through any small, contained community from one person to another, through the particular channel of things that are not officially happening, and therefore carry twice the interest of things that are. I heard about myself from a Sorathi recruit who passed me in the corridor on the morning of the third day and said, without preamble, "Testing Bay 12. Your theory. I am coming to watch." I did not say yes, I did not say no. I went to testing Bay 12. By the time I arrived, there were 11 of them. Sorathi, 4 of them, with data tablets already running. 3 Dreth, standing in a cluster near the back wall with the patient stillness of species that have learned to wait out situations before committing to a reaction. And Ethan, not the one from the classroom, a different one, taller, with a structure that suggested significantly more age than anything I wanted to calculate. 2 other human recruits who had heard something through channels I could not trace and decided that whatever was happening was worth their time. And Oren. The archivist stood near the door with his hands folded and an expression of someone who had decided that if he was going to write a report about this, he might as well see the thing he was reporting on. I set up my notes on the equipment stand, checked the coherence field monitors, confirmed the sample was positioned correctly, then I turned to the room. "I'm not going to give you a long explanation," I said. "The theory is in the posted documentation if you want to read it. Short version. A subcoherence threshold projectile with no energy signature should not trigger rethreading. Chemical propellant, lead core, no field interaction. If I am right, the sample does not reconstruct. If I am wrong, it reconstructs in 90 seconds and we all go back to survival protocols." The Sorathi with the tablet looked up. "Your theoretical framework has 3 unsupported assumptions." "Yes," I said, "that is what a test is for." He looked at me for a moment, then looked back at his tablet and kept running numbers. I picked up the firearm, checked the chamber. The round seated cleanly, the mechanism moving with the precise, simple reliability of old engineering that did not require complexity, because it had been designed when simplicity was the only option. The room was quiet. I thought about saying something worth the moment, something that would land well if anyone was writing this down. I had nothing. The mining crew had not had a speech either. They had had a problem and a tool and not enough time. I thought about them, about whoever had picked up this kind of weapon in a dark corridor on a ship that was running out of options, who had not been a soldier, who had not been trained for the thing they were doing, who had just been there with what they had and had used it. That felt like enough of a speech. I shot the sample. The discharge sound was different from anything else in that room, lower than energy weapons, simpler, a mechanical, specific sound, the sound of a physical thing propelled by a physical force, carrying no signature that the coherence field could read or use. The coherence monitors registered the discharge. The field activity spiked at discharge and then settled, flat, normal ambient levels. No rethreading signal. The sample did not move. 20 seconds. 40. One of the Sorathi had stopped typing. I could see it from the corner of my eye. The data tablet held still, not running calculations, just held. 60 seconds. The Keth sample remained non-functional. 90 seconds. Nothing. No reconstruction, no rethreading, no field activity spike that would signal the process beginning. The sample was damaged and it stayed damaged, and the coherence monitors read flat and clean and ordinary. 11 seconds of silence after the 90-second window closed. I was counting. Then the Sorathi with the tablet said, quietly and without looking up from his screen, "Coherence field interaction, 0. Rethreading process, not initiated. Result is consistent with subthreshold hypothesis." He paused. The framework was correct. He said it the way a mathematician says that an equation balances, not with excitement, not with celebration, just with the clean recognition of something that is what it is, a fact landing into place. His stylus moved again. He had started taking new notes. I looked at the doorway. Veilcore was standing there. I did not know how long he had been there. He was still, the way old things are still, and his expression was something I could not read except that it was not the weather-watching tiredness from before. He looked at the sample, looked at the monitors, looked at me. The hum was very quiet. "The 3 remaining rounds," he said, not loudly, just evenly. "When you have secured the equipment, bring them to me." "Yes, sir," I said. He looked at the room, at the Sorathi taking notes, at the Ethan who had not moved, at Oren standing by the door with an expression that had moved from resigned to something else, something quieter. Then Veilcore said, still evenly, "Good documentation, recruit." He left. The room exhaled. One of the Dreth in the back said something in their own language. Another one responded. I did not speak Dreth. I looked at the human recruit nearest to me, a young man named Callum who had been in my orientation group and who had so far distinguished himself primarily by always having extra protein bars and being willing to share them. "What did they say?" I asked. "I do not speak Dreth either," Callum said. "Of course not." He was quiet for a second. Then, "You just changed everything you know." "Maybe," I said. "Not maybe," the Sorathi said, still looking at his tablet. "The data is clean. Replication is straightforward. Manufacturing specifications for a subcoherence projectile are within standard production capability." He finally looked up. "You have just ended the doctrine of unwinnable engagements." He said it without fanfare, without anything beyond the mathematical weight of its truth. That is not maybe. I looked down at the firearm in my hands. The worn grip, the old finish, 200 years old, and it had been waiting in a vault behind a door with a physical key, and nobody had thought to ask it the right question. 11 rounds. 193 years in an archive. Well, ain't that something? "Start the documentation," I told the room. "All of it. Every reading from every monitor, every step of the test setup, every calculation. If we are doing this right, we are doing it right. They started, every one of them. And I took the 3 remaining rounds and went to find Vale Core. The alert reached us 12 hours later. I was in the middle of the 3rd documentation review, cross-checking the coherence monitor readings with the Sorathi team's independent calculations, when every comm unit in the academy fired at once. A single tone first, the kind that cuts through walls and sleep and anything else you happen to be doing, and then the words, flat and fast from the emergency channel. Keth engagement, outer station Delta 7, active incursion, station security overwhelmed, 14 academy personnel on rotation including 2 instructors, evacuation in progress, response units deploying within the hour. I looked at the 3 rounds on the table in front of me. 3 rounds. The door of the documentation room opened. Valecore stood there and he looked at the rounds and then at me, and the expression on his face was not readable in any way. I had language for except that it was very old and very precise. Calloway, he said. I know, I said. This is not a training exercise. Delta 7 has. I know what Delta 7 has, I said. I read the engagement files. I know the layout. I know the protocols. I stood up. I have the only thing that works, and I have 11 rounds fabricated to spec in the materials lab, and there are people at that station, and I am not going to sit here doing documentation. He looked at me for a long moment. 11 rounds, he said. 11 rounds. He was quiet. Then, the response unit is a mixed deployment, 8 personnel. It was not planned around your capability. The tactical framework is standard survival protocol, containment, withdrawal, minimal engagement. The tactical framework is wrong, I said. Not their fault. They do not know what I know yet. They will if you brief them on the transport, he said. I picked up the rounds. Then I need to be on the transport. The transport bay was controlled chaos, the good kind purposeful movement, each person knowing their piece of the problem. The particular energy of a group that was scared and professional and keeping the scared below the professional. 8 personnel already in kit checking equipment, reviewing the station schematic on a shared display. Mixed deployment, 3 Dreth, 2 Sorathi, 1 Ethan and 2 humans. One of the humans was Callum. He had extra protein bars, of course he did. I walked to the center of the bay. Brief change to the engagement framework, I said. 7 faces turned toward me. The 8th, the Ethan, oriented without turning, which was just something the Ethan did, and I had decided not to find unsettling. My name is Calloway. I am a first-week recruit, and I have 11 rounds in my hand that can stop a Keth, and not one thing else in this transport bay can say the same. Nobody moved. I briefed them in 4 minutes. The theory, the test results, the coherence field mechanism, the specs. The Sorathi team lead pulled up the documentation on her tablet halfway through and started cross-referencing in real time without breaking eye contact. By the end she was nodding, not enthusiastically, not with anything as warm as belief, but with the specific precision of someone whose math had just checked out. You have 11 rounds, she said. Yes. For how many Keths? We do not know yet. The engagement report said multiple. Station Delta 7 has a crew rotation of 14, and station security reported being overwhelmed before communications were cut. I am going to say conservatively, more than 11, possibly, which means I need to make each round a decision and not a reflex, and I need you to keep anything I am not shooting at away from me while I am deciding. The Sorathi looked at the Dreth. The Dreth looked at each other with the patient, assessing stillness of their kind. Then the senior Dreth said, "We can do that." The transport lifted. Delta 7 was an outer monitoring station, not built for combat, built for observation, the kind of structure that is never supposed to be in the middle of what it was currently in the middle of. We came in through the secondary docking ring, which the station schematics showed as partially shielded from the primary Keth ingress point, and we hit the corridor running because the sounds coming through the bulkhead made it very clear that running was the appropriate speed. 2 Dreth ahead of me, 1 on each flank. The Sorathi team lead running parallel in the adjacent corridor with the other Sorathi, converging on the station's central hub from 2 directions at once. The Keth were in the hub. I smelled the engagement before I saw it, not blood, not fire, but something electrical and sharp. The specific smell of coherence field activity spiking and respiking as the station's defenders hit the Keth with every weapon they had and watched it accomplish nothing. Through the corridor junction I could see the hub entrance, and through the hub entrance I could see the station security crew pressed back against the far wall, still firing, still trying, still watching the Keth reconstruct and advance. 3 of them. 3 Keth in the hub. The senior Dreth beside me held up 3 fingers without looking at me, already counting, already placing. I counted my rounds, 11, 3 Keth, clean math, 2 rounds each with 5 left. I did not want to think about why I might need 5 more after that. On my count, I said, I need clear lines, do not cross my firing angle. Understood, the Dreth said. 3. The Sorathi team hit the hub from the left junction. The Keth turned all 3 of them toward the new threat. The station security crew, confused and exhausted, pressed back further. 2. The Dreth moved into position, placing themselves with the precise, unhurried efficiency of species that have been conducting tactical operations for longer than my civilization has had writing. 1. I stepped into the hub. The first Keth was 12 meters away, turned toward the Sorathi, and I put the round into the center of its mass, and it went down, and it stayed down, and the coherence monitors on my wrist unit read flat and I was already moving. The second Keth turned toward the sound of the discharge. Its surface shifted and pulsed, recognition, threat assessment, calculation happening in whatever passed for thought in a Keth. I gave it 1 second of that, 1 second for it to figure out what it was dealing with. Then I put the second round in, and it went down and stayed down. The third one was not in position. It had moved fast, with the fluid purposefulness of something that does not need to fear what is pointing at it, that has never needed to fear anything pointing at it in 300 years of engagement across 6 civilizations. It came toward me from the left, and the Dreth on my left moved to intercept, and the Keth went through the Dreth's attempt the way water goes through a grate, around it, past it, not even slowing. It was close, closer than 12 meters, closer than 5. I had 4 rounds left. I thought about the mining crew. Whoever had been standing in whatever corridor on that ship, not a soldier, not trained, just there with what they had. I had more than they had. I had a test result, and 11 rounds and 8 people who knew what I knew now and were moving to keep the angle clear. 2 rounds, I thought. 2 rounds for this one. Leave the others for what I cannot see yet. I put the first round in. The Keth slowed, did not fall. Slowed first time I had seen that, first time any of us had seen that, because the rethreading sequence was beginning and the round had interrupted it, but not cleanly, not completely, and there was a half-second where the surface of it froze the way static freezes on a screen right before the signal cuts. I put the second round in. It fell. It stayed down. The hub was quiet. The station security crew against the far wall did not move for a moment. Then one of them, a young man, barely older than me, in a uniform that had seen a rough few hours, said, very quietly, "What did you just do?" "Something someone figured out a long time ago," I said. "We just forgot to follow up on it." The Sorathi team lead was already on her tablet. Callum appeared at the hub entrance with his kit, and 1 protein bar extended in my direction with the energy of someone who had decided this was the appropriate response to the situation. I took it. We swept the rest of the station, 2 more Keth in the lower observation bay. I used 2 rounds each, clean and deliberate, making the decision before I pulled the action every single time. Not reflex. Choice. The Dreth held my flanks without being asked after the first one. No words, just math recognizing math. 7 rounds used, 4 left. The station was clear. I sat down on the deck of the central hub with my back against the wall and the firearm in my hands, and 4 rounds in my pocket, and the protein bar, which I ate because I could not remember the last time I had eaten something, and my hands needed something to do that was not shaking. They were not shaking. They wanted to. I could feel the want of it, the adrenaline looking for somewhere to go, the body trying to catch up with what had just happened. But I held the bar and ate it in even bites and looked at the 3 Keth on the floor of the hub that were not getting up, and I let the adrenaline find somewhere quieter. Callum sat down beside me. He did not say anything. He just sat there, which was exactly right. The Sorathi team lead came to stand in front of me. She had a full data capture from the engagement on her tablet. Every round, every result. Every coherence field reading during and after each discharge. Clean data, she said. Every result consistent with the test. Replication confirmed under live engagement conditions. She paused. This is enough to rewrite doctrine. That is what it is for, I said. My comm unit opened. Veilcore's voice. Quiet. Even. Coming from the academy on a secure channel, which meant he had been monitoring the mission feed from the beginning, which meant he had watched all of it. I will need those 4 rounds analyzed, he said, for replication. Not good work. Not you were right. Not the speech I had not been expecting anyway, because he was not a speech kind of person, and neither was I, and we both knew it. Just what you found, we will make more of. I looked at the 4 rounds in my palm. Small things, old design, built for ordinary dangers by people who never imagined the problem they were going to solve. Replication. That word did more work than 100 speeches. It meant the mining crew's answer would not sit in an archive anymore. It meant the next 6 civilizations that faced the Keth would not face them the same way. It meant 11 rounds was only the beginning of the count. Well, ain't that something? I thought about Veilcore's words in Room 7. Humans carry damage the way other species carry bone, load-bearing. He had not been wrong. He had just been looking at the weight and not at what the weight was building. I closed my hand around the 4 rounds. I will have the documentation ready by morning, I said. Veilcore did not respond. The channel closed. The station hummed around me. Callum passed me a second protein bar. The Sorathi team lead went back to her tablet. The Dreth were already running a secondary sweep of the lower decks with the thoroughness of species that do not trust the first pass. The Keth on the floor did not move. The instructor had said no weapon could stop it. He was not wrong. He just had not met the right stubborn yet.